October was a mixed bag. G'day bookworms, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to give you a wrap up of what I read in October for spooky season. I have been thinking about wrap ups. I only bring out one video a week and having to do a wrap up as well seems a little much. So I'm going to go back to most likely quarterly wrap ups or seasonal wrap ups. So this one will be the last for a little while. Okay, I just need to point out that if you hear squeaking, that is my puppy going to town on her toys. And if you hear banging, that's my neighbor doing some work. He seems to like to do work on a Saturday afternoon when I'm recording this. All right, I'm going to start first with what I watched, which is very little. I actually thought I'd end up watching a lot more horror films and I wasn't in the mood. I did want to watch The Omen, but I found out that it is out on Blu-ray and my copy is only a DVD, so I thought, no, I'm going to get the Blu-ray and then I'll watch it. Because I'm a bit of a purist when it comes to movies. The truth is though that I've watched so much crap over the years, like most of us. I have sat down in front of the TV and just watched such rubbish that now that I'm back to reading a lot more regularly and a lot more books, I have very little interest in watching shows or movies. I watch occasionally, but nowhere near as much as I used to. But I do miss my movies sometimes. However, I know that they're there and I can watch them whenever I do get in the mood. Really, the only film I watched was Ghost Story. I think it came out in 1984. It had a lot of old-timers like Fred Astaire, Melvyn Douglas and Douglas Fairbanks Jr. I watched it because I had just read the book by Peter Straub, which I'll get to in a moment. But it was quite an average film actually, if not a poor film, and I didn't really love it. So that's really all I watched that was spooky related in October. So what did I read? I read 11 books altogether, and I'm going to put up here a graph from Storygraph, which is an app I've been using this year to keep track of all the books I'm reading. I used to just use a notepad to write them all down. This is so much faster and I love these graphs. They give you a really good indication of what genres you're reading, how many books, how long it takes, etc. Now, I have given scores to these books, but honestly, they are completely unreliable because I change my mind all the time. I've come to the realization that I'm extremely conservative when it comes to scoring books or giving ratings to books. I never thought I would use the term conservative in relation to me, but there you go. So, as I said in the intro, it was a mixed bag. I had some great reading experiences and some not so great. The first book I read was Skull Throne, the fourth book in the Demon Cycle series, which I almost DNF'd. I did not enjoy at least half of that book. I got very bored with it and had a lot of issues with that. But the second half really did pick up and I did enjoy it in the end. I haven't picked up the fifth one, but I will at some point because it's the final book in the series. For spooky season itself, I did use my little cauldron to pick out books at random, and the first one I picked was Psycho. I can't remember the author's name, but I'll put a picture of the book on the screen anyway. Whilst I did enjoy this, I didn't love it. I have seen the film Psycho many times and know it very well, and I struggle reading books based on films that I've already seen, especially one that I'm very familiar with. I didn't feel it added all that much to the film. So whilst the book itself is good and well written, I just didn't love it. I next picked out Ghost Story by Peter Straub, and I've actually recorded a review of this book, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, except that it really isn't about ghosts. It is about four elderly men who tell ghost stories to each other and who are haunted by something that happened to them in their youth. My Patreon book club read was Lord of the Flies. Now this I really did like. I first read that when I was a teenager for school, and I was appalled at what happened to the children in that book. So it was interesting to read it many, many years later, probably 40 or more years later, and see how I felt about it. It still left me appalled that humanity can descend into savagery when we take away all the trappings of civilization, especially considering these kids are very young. Some of them are 5 or 6, and the oldest I think is 12. But these kids are also very representative of adults, and I think that's what's sad. It's a very good book. It's very well written. In some ways, it is jarring because the writing can be very descriptive, lyrical, and then you have these very jarring, abrupt statements, conversations between the children. But I like that contrast. It made, I think, what the kids did say so much more impactful, for me anyway. I then finished my audiobook, The Fog, by James Herbert. I have been listening to a lot of his books on audio and loving them, and I really did enjoy this, but if you think the films are anything like the book, no, not at all. The cause of the fog is quite different, and I don't want to give away any spoilers by saying how. Now, I really do enjoy Herbert's writing, and I think this is one of his earlier books, but just like the others, he seems to enjoy including very gratuitous and, in some ways, detailed sex scenes. It seems so bizarre to me. I wonder if that's what was expected at the time. Sex and violence, especially in horror. I don't know, but reading it today, it's a little cringeworthy, and I certainly don't enjoy that part. But I really do like the way he builds the tension throughout the book. You also become attached to the characters. He's very good at drawing characters, though I don't love his women. Again, most likely because this is a product of its time. Nevertheless, I really do enjoy the horror elements in this book, and I'm going to read more of Herbert. I did take a break from horror to do a buddy read of The Black Company by Glenn Cook, something I have been wanting to read for a very, very long time. I only read the first book, and it's not a very long book, and I really enjoyed this. Very different style of writing to most of fantasy that came out at the time, and I know that this series was very influential on Stephen Erickson, who wrote the Malazan books. And one thing I really liked about his writing is that he writes very short and sharp sentences. It can take a little bit of time to adjust to that, because I'm used to much more flowery prose in fantasy, but it's really effective for it. I really like this, and I'm going to read more in this series. I want to see what else Cook is going to do with these characters, and I'm hoping to get to the second sometime in November. I then picked out 2 books by Ronald Malfi out of my cauldron. One is Cradle Lake, and the other is Black Mouth. I was so looking forward to these, and I will confess I did not love them. Cradle Lake relates to a young couple who had several miscarriages, and the wife is suicidal over it. And they inherit a house near Cradle Lake, which seems to have supernatural properties. That's all I want to say about the plot. I really didn't take to either of the characters in this book. There was also a lot of emphasis on the trauma that this couple are going through. And frankly, that was something I did not enjoy. I'm used to reading horror where you just have ordinary people who then are put in extraordinary situations. I really wasn't looking to delve into this trauma. I just wanted a straight out horror. So I didn't love Cradle Lake. Black Mouth is similar to it. I've seen it described as a poor man's It or an ode to it. And I think both are accurate. There are 4 people who, when we meet, are adults but suffered through a trauma when they were younger. And this was a book that was written in several different perspectives, including a first-person perspective, our main protagonist. And I disliked him intensely. This book dealt also with his alcoholism and his personal trauma regarding his father as separate from the trauma that the kids shared when they were young. And again, I thought, we're dealing with trauma? I just want a horror. Yeah, maybe that is shallow of me, but that's what I was looking for. If I want to read about trauma or issues that people deal with, like alcoholism or drug addiction or loss of children, I would prefer to read that in a different genre, not in a horror book. There was also a very gratuitous scene involving abuse of an animal, and it almost made me give up there. It came out of nowhere and it was completely and utterly unnecessary in my opinion. We had just been introduced to this new character, first chapter involving this character, and then I read that and I couldn't believe it. It put me off so much that I really struggled to shake that image out of my head. I cannot stand to read about abuse with animals or children, and especially when it is gratuitous, and this felt gratuitous to me. So that really put me off the rest of this book. It changed my perception of this book, and I ended up not enjoying it. I haven't given up entirely on Malfi. I think I will try one more book and see, one that is very popular. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but I'll put a picture of it on the screen. But if I don't like that one, it will be my last. I don't know if including characters who are going through some very heavy traumatic experience is meant to make us more attached to these characters, because it doesn't work for me in a horror book. And I found that the horror in Black Mouth in particular was really underwhelming. Yeah. Then I read Song of Kali by Dan Simmons. It's my first Dan Simmons book, and I think it is his first published novel. I really enjoyed this book, though I know that some people consider it racist. This is about a young American poet who goes to Calcutta with his young wife and baby to connect with an Indian poet who has been missing for 8 years and obtain his poetry for publication in the States. Our main protagonist, and the book is written in the first person, is a very objectionable character, in my opinion. I hated him. Yeah, I really didn't like him. His observations of Calcutta were extremely negative, and I have seen criticisms that people consider that racist. I don't think, though, that observations of the conditions, the living conditions in Calcutta at that time that the book was written, which I think was the 70s, is actually racist in itself. The character, it might be argued, is racist. I just thought he felt superior and arrogant to anyone anyway, whether it was those living in Calcutta or even Americans. He thought he was something special. I did not agree, actually. And his behavior throughout this book made me wonder how much of it was accurate and how much was in his imagination. The Song of Kali relates to an Indian goddess, a Hindu goddess, I believe. In the book, the worship of Kali is a cult where people do behave very badly, where people do horrific things in the name of Kali. I can see that some might consider the way Kali was portrayed as blasphemous, but this is meant to be a horror. It's not meant to be realistic. That's my opinion anyway. However, Simmons built the tension throughout this book so well that I was on the edge of my seat, waiting to see what was going to happen. And it didn't go where I expected it to go, and I felt a little cheated, actually. I was expecting a supernatural element to this book, and I was left thinking, no, this is really about the nature of evil. I came away feeling that the author wanted to say something more profound than just have a horror story. That this was more about the nature of evil and how easily it can spread from place to place. And that if we scratch the surface, underneath everyone has the capacity for evil. And that certain acts are incomprehensible. That we will never understand why they happened. For me, Song of Kali was not so much a supernatural horror, but what occurs is horrific. At the time, I was disappointed that there wasn't a supernatural element, but now on reflection, I've learned to appreciate what Simmons was aiming for, or I think what he was aiming for. After some of these heavy books, I felt I needed a break, so I also read The We Free Men by Terry Pratchett. It is one of his young adult books, one of his later books in the Discworld series, featuring Tiffany Aching. This was the first time she appears in this series. And I expected it to be a bit more middle grade, and it did not come across like that at all. I really enjoyed this one, and I love the Knack McFeagle. They are just hilarious. They're little pixies who have, I think, a Scottish accent, and they are just so cute. I know they wouldn't want me to call them cute, but they really were, and I just found them delightful. I also really liked the character of Tiffany Aching, and we also got to see Granny Weatherwax, yay! So this was really charming, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. But then, there are very few Discworld books that I have not loved. And my last pick out of my cauldron was Swan Song by Robert McCammon. I have been wanting to read McCammon for quite some time, and this has been recommended to me since I loved The Stand so much. It deals with a nuclear holocaust that occurs. And similarly to Stephen King, McCammon takes his time to explore certain characters. such as Sister, who I absolutely loved, as well as Swan and Josh and Paul, just to mention a few. I love long books because they give the author time to truly explore a character, to show us who they are, to show us how they change, how they grow. And the characters all really do change and grow in this book. He also introduced a very bizarre element regarding masks, and that's all I want to say, because I don't want to spoil this for anyone. But ultimately, this is about good and evil, with supernatural elements as well. And the themes that McCammon explores include things like redemption, like hope, like faith, like friendship. Now, for someone who loves The Stand as much as me and has read it many times, I did struggle initially with Swan Song because I thought, no, I like The Stand better. But as I read more of this story that McCammon crafted, I became extremely attached to these characters. Yeah, because I am definitely a character-driven reader. I don't care if you don't have a great plot if I love your characters, and I love so many of these characters. I want to mention Sister in particular because as someone who grew up in the 70s and 80s, my biggest complaint was always that there were so few really strong women portrayed in film, shows, or in books. And this was written in the 80s, so I was really glad to see a strong female character who hasn't been highly exaggerated and who is kick-ass, if you ask me. Friendship for me is one of the most important things in my life, and I love seeing it portrayed realistically in books, especially between characters that I love. That's one of my favorite things, seeing them become close and seeing those bonds of friendship developing between characters. This was a very good book, and I highly recommend it if you like books about an apocalypse and the aftermath. If you love The Stand, I think you will love this as well. So that's all the books I read in October. And one thing I learned was that I cannot read horror continuously. I had to take breaks by reading other things, something lighter. So that is what I got up to in October. Now, of course, I'd love to hear from you guys. What did you read? What did you watch? Did you have a good October? Did you have a good Halloween for those of you who celebrate it? You know, I always want to hear, and you can let me know down in the comments. Well, thank you all very much for watching. I truly do appreciate it. If you like this video, then you know what to do. You can like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I also have a Patreon account if you wish to support me in that way. I hope you all have a beautiful day, and I'll see you next time. Bye. I wanted to thank all my patrons, but a big shout out to my book dragons, Gabriella, Johanna, Joe, Kiki, Laurie, and Michael.